I never expected it would come to this, sitting alone in a cafe, sipping my coffee, and reflecting on the chain of events that had unfolded just a few days ago. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, but somehow it tasted bitter, like the memories I couldn't shake off. I had imagined this moment to be a celebration, a time when I could finally show my family what I had achieved, a tangible symbol of my years of hard work, sacrifice, and love. But instead, what I got was the breaking point of strained relationships I'd been blind to for years. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I had always been someone who worked tirelessly to provide for my family, to build a life I could be proud of. My name is Harrison Parker, and for most of my life, I've built businesses from the ground up, climbing up the ladder of success with determination and grit. Yet, as time passed, people started to see me differently. My son, Eric, especially, to him, I was no longer the man who had once been a go-getter. To him, I was just a retired, aging figure, clinging to memories of a past life. His words stung, though I'd grown accustomed to them. But the truth was, beneath that surface of calm, I was hurt. I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, yet nothing seemed to be enough for him. And so, I made a decision one I thought would finally bring us together. I didn't want just to give them another vacation. I wanted to give them something more, something meaningful. I decided to build our dream chalet. It wasn't just a house, it was a gift, a sanctuary that I envisioned would bring us closer, nestled in the breathtaking beauty of Whistler, Canada. It had everything: the perfect mountain views, luxurious amenities, and a peaceful atmosphere. It was meant to be a place where we could forget the stresses of daily life and simply enjoy each other's company, a space where we could create new memories. It had taken years of careful planning, saving, and investing. I put everything I had into it, all the while hoping it would show my family the depth of my love for them. But when the day came to reveal it, I didn't get the response I had imagined. I didn't expect applause, of course, but I also didn't expect what I got: disbelief, judgment, and mockery. Eric was the first to speak when we arrived at the chalet. His voice, laced with sarcasm, immediately cut through the air. "Wow, Dad, you really went all out. Didn't you?" His tone was polite, but beneath it, I could hear the disdain. He didn't see this as a gesture of love. To him, it was just another ridiculous display of wealth from a man who no longer had the means to justify such luxuries. His words, whether intended or not, hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped this chalet would be a bridge between us, to a way to reconnect, but it felt more like a wall being built between us, one comment at a time. As I stood there, looking at the chalet I had built for us, I realized how much I had underestimated the depth of our disconnection. This wasn't just about the house, it was about everything that had been left unsaid for so long. I had spent years building this life, hoping it would be enough. But it wasn't, and as the cold mountain air settled around me, I knew the real work wasn't in building houses or businesses. It was in rebuilding the trust and respect within my family, something I wasn't sure how to fix anymore. I stood there, on the deck of the chalet, watching Eric's footsteps leave prints in the fresh snow, his voice still ringing in my ears. I had imagined this moment so differently, envisioned the excitement, the pride on their faces, the warmth of family, gathered in a place I had created. But instead, it felt like a distant dream, one that had been shattered in the cold silence between us. My son's mockery echoed through my mind. And for the first time, I realized how much of my life I had spent building things, acquiring success, thinking that if I could just prove my worth through actions, through tangible achievements, they would finally see me. But it wasn't enough. It never had been. Lindsay, my daughter-in-law, stood a little further back, observing the scene with a mix of concern and discomfort. She hadn't said much since we arrived, but her eyes told a different story, one of unease, maybe even pity. She was always the cautious one, the one who didn't rock the boat. She had always cared. At least, I thought she did. But even she, with her quiet demeanor, seemed unsettled by what she was witnessing. Her words earlier, asking if I had spent all my retirement savings on the chalet, stung more than I'd like to admit. She didn't understand. They didn't understand. I had never felt so invisible in my life. I had spent my entire career building businesses, working long hours, sacrificing moments with my family to ensure they had everything they could ever need. When you reach a certain point of success, people expect more than just material things. They expect respect, acknowledgement, love even. And yet, the more I gave, the more it seemed to go unnoticed. I thought this chalet would be the one thing that would make them see me, see the person I had worked so hard to become. I thought it would speak volumes about who I was, the father, the provider, the man who had built something from nothing. But now, standing in the midst of my family's indifference, I realized that the chalet, this grand gesture, was nothing more than a symbol of my failure to truly connect with them. The house wasn't the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what truly mattered, what had always mattered. Family, respect, understanding. The truth hit me like a cold wave. Eric, Lindsay, and I weren't just disconnected in that moment. We had been disconnected for years. All the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the long hours I'd spent away from them, they had built an invisible wall, one that had slowly crept up between us, and no amount of wealth or material success could tear it down. As I stood there, the cold air biting at my skin, I realized I wasn't just fighting for their respect anymore. I was fighting for something deeper, my own sense of self-worth. The chalet was meant to be a bridge, a gesture of love, but instead, it had become a reminder of how far apart we had drifted. I wasn't just trying to rebuild the trust in my family. I was trying to rebuild my own belief in myself. I looked over at Sarah and William, who had remained quiet throughout the ordeal. Sarah, the one person who had always shown genuine warmth and understanding, gave me a look of sympathy. She didn't say much, but I could see in her eyes that she recognized the pain I was going through. It wasn't the judgment I had received from Eric or Lindsay, but her silent understanding that stung the most, and it was then that I knew the realization came slowly, like a slow burn that maybe I had been doing this all wrong. Maybe the problem wasn't with the chalet, or with my family's inability to see me for who I was. Maybe the problem was that I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their approval, trying to prove my worth through what I built, instead of simply being enough as I was. What was the point of all this? If I couldn't even connect with the people I cared about most, it wasn't about the chalet. It was about the years I had spent hiding behind my success, thinking that if I just built something grand enough, they would see me, they would love me, they would understand. But now, standing there, feeling the weight of my own failure, I realized that the love and respect I craved would never come from things. It had to come from within, and perhaps from those closest to me. It was time to ask myself if I had given them enough of who I truly was. Instead of always hiding behind achievements and grandeur, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, knowing that the journey ahead would require more than just grand gestures. It would require honesty, vulnerability, and above all, a willingness to finally be seen for who I really was, without the need for validation, without the need to prove myself. The silence hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. As I tried to process everything that had just happened, I watched Eric's retreating figure, his back stiff with judgment, and my mind raced. I had built this chalet not just as a vacation home, but as a symbol of my hard work, my dedication, my love for my family. I had envisioned the moment of unveiling it as something meaningful, an opportunity to finally show them the fruits of my labor, to share with them the life I had worked so hard to create. But instead of gratitude or pride, all I received was mockery, a skepticism, and a profound sense of being misunderstood. I couldn't help but feel like I had been wrong all along. I thought that by creating something tangible, something grand, I could force a connection. But instead, I had exposed the cracks in our family. Cracks that had been there for years but were hidden beneath the surface. Eric's words echoed in my mind. Wow, Dad, you really went all out, didn't you? The disdain was palpable, and I had braced myself for it. But it still hit harder than I imagined, no matter how hard I tried. It felt like nothing I did would ever be enough for him. Lindsay, my daughter-in-law, stood off to the side, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She was always the more reserved one, and her concern for me was genuine. But her discomfort was impossible to ignore. When she asked if I had spent all my retirement savings on the chalet, it felt less like a question and more like an indictment. I could see it in her eyes, doubt, hesitation, and a kind of judgment I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just about the chalet anymore. It was about everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. And yet still, there was no recognition, no understanding. As I stood there, absorbing the weight of their reactions, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. What had I expected, that a grand gesture like this would magically fix everything? That this one beautiful chalet, tucked away in the mountains, would mend years of strained relationships and misunderstandings? The reality was much harsher. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove my worth to my family, but it wasn't through things that I could fix the emotional distance between us. The chalet wasn't the issue. The issue was that no matter how much I gave, no matter how much I sacrificed, it never seemed to be enough. I looked over at Sarah and William, who had remained silent during the exchange. Sarah, always the peacemaker, was the one person in the room who seemed to truly understand the depth of what I had done. She had never judged me, never made me feel like a failure. Her warmth was genuine, and in that moment, I was grateful for her quiet support. But even Sarah's understanding couldn't heal the rift that had grown between me and my own son. There was nothing I could do to fix it. The damage had already been done. As the minutes passed and the tension thickened, I realized something fundamental. I had been so focused on proving my worth through tangible accomplishments, businesses, properties, wealth, that I had forgotten what truly mattered. The respect and love I had been seeking from my family couldn't be bought or earned through material success. It had to come from something deeper, something more meaningful. And the truth was, I had spent so much of my life focused on building things that I had neglected to build the most important thing of all, a relationship based on mutual understanding and respect. It was a painful realization, but it was also a necessary one. I couldn't keep trying to force my family to see me through the lens of my achievements. I had spent too many years living in the shadow of my own success, trying to impress them, trying to make them proud. But in doing so, I had lost sight of the real reason I had worked so hard in the first place, to build a life that would allow us all to connect, to enjoy each other's company, to create memories together. And somehow, I had let that slip away. I turned away from the group, feeling the weight of it all bearing down on me. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I stepped outside into the crisp mountain air, hoping that the quiet of the snow-covered landscape would calm my racing thoughts. I had built this place, this dream, for them, but in the end, it seemed that the dream I had built was not the one they wanted. The silence outside was a stark contrast to the chaos inside. The air was cold and still, and as I stood there, alone with my thoughts, I realized that I had to stop trying to fix everything for them. I had done my part. I had given everything I had. Now, it was up to them to understand. But even if they didn't, I couldn't keep carrying the burden of their expectations. It was time for me to start living for myself, to stop trying to prove myself to others, and to accept that no amount of material success could make up for the emotional connection that had been lost along the way. And that's when I realized that the most important thing I could give them was not this chalet, or any grand gesture, but the truth of who I was, without pretense, without the need to impress. I was done trying to prove my worth. Now, it was time to rebuild the relationships that truly mattered, starting with myself. As he stood outside, the cold mountain air biting at my skin, I felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to form. Even amidst the lingering pain, I had spent so much of my life focusing on external achievements, thinking they would be enough to gain my family's respect and admiration. But now, standing in the quiet of the snow-covered landscape, I realized how deeply flawed that thinking had been. The chalet, the years of hard work, the sacrifice, all of it had been in vain if it wasn't built on a foundation of mutual understanding and connection. It wasn't about the house. It was about the people inside it, my family, and the emotional distance that had been growing between us for years. I thought that by creating something beautiful, I could somehow mend the strained relationships, but instead, I had unwittingly exposed the chasm that had always existed. Eric's words, Lindsay's doubts, and even Sarah's silent understanding, they all pointed to the same painful truth. I had neglected what truly mattered. I had been so focused on proving myself through material things that I had forgotten the most important thing of all, being present, being seen for who I truly was, without the facade of success or grandeur. I had always prided myself on being the provider, the man who had worked tirelessly to create a comfortable life for his family. But in doing so, I had forgotten to nurture the relationships that truly mattered. The connection with my son, Eric, had been strained for years, and I had never stopped to truly understand why. Instead, I had kept pushing forward, thinking that if I just achieved more, built more, gave more, they would eventually see me for who I truly was. But they didn't, and I had to face that. The realization was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. Like the weight of my own self-imposed expectations had started to lift. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I had already given everything I had. Now, it was time to stop hiding behind the material things I had built and start living for myself. As I stood there, lost in thought, the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow broke my reverie. I turned to see Lindsay approaching, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and hesitation. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to keep the peace. But even she couldn't ignore the tension that had been brewing for so long. Dad, she began, to her voice quiet. Tentative. Can we talk? I nodded, gesturing for her to sit next to me on the bench. The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Lindsay had always been someone I could talk to, even if we didn't always see eye to eye. And in that moment, I realized that, despite everything that had happened, I still needed her, just as much as she needed me. She sat down beside me, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. I'm sorry, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to fix what's happened between us, between you and Eric, but I can see how much you've sacrificed for all of us. And I'm sorry if we've made you feel like it wasn't enough. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always known that Lindsay cared, but hearing her admit that she saw the sacrifices I had made without judgment, without reservations, made me realize just how much I had been seeking that acknowledgement all along. I had spent so much of my life trying to gain their respect, but in doing so, I had neglected the very thing I had been seeking: love, understanding, and acceptance for who I was, not just for what I could provide. I never wanted you to feel like you had to prove anything to us. Lindsay continued, her voice softer now. I've always appreciated everything you've done. I didn't understand. Not fully. I nodded, trying to swallow the lump that had formed in my throat. I know you didn't, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. And that's not your fault. I never gave you a chance to understand. I was so focused on showing you what I had built that I forgot to show you who I really was. There was a long pause as Lindsay absorbed my words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice kid but determined. I see it now. Dad, I see how much you've done, how much you've given, and I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I reached over and placed my hand on hers, squeezing gently. For the first time in what felt like years, I felt a sense of connection, a sense of healing beginning to take place between us. This wasn't going to be easy. There was still a lot of work to be done, a lot of wounds to heal. But in that moment, I felt hopeful. I'm not perfect, I said softly, and I've made mistakes. But I'm not going to hide behind this house, this chalet, or any of the things I've built anymore. I've given all I can, and now it's time for me to focus on what really matters. Lindsay smiled, her eyes filled with tears. I'm glad to hear you say that, Dad, and I'll be here, no matter what. As we sat there, side by side, watching the snow gently fall around us, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. The chalet, the house I had worked so hard to build, no longer felt like the centerpiece of my life. It was the relationships, the love, the understanding that truly mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to nurture those relationships, to rebuild the connection with my family that had been lost along the way. The journey wouldn't be easy, but at least now, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. And as I looked over at Lindsay, I knew that, with time and effort, we would find our way back to each other. We weren't there yet, but we were on our way. And that was enough for me. The weight of the past had begun to lift, and in its place, I felt a sense of peace in knowing that I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I had already done enough. The moments I spent with Lindsay on that cold, quiet bench were more than just a conversation. They were a turning point. It was the first time in ages that I had felt a sense of clarity, as if the weight I had carried for so long was finally starting to ease. We didn't solve everything in that conversation, but something inside me shifted. I realized that, despite all the years of frustration, bitterness, and misunderstandings. There was still hope. Hope that, with patience and understanding, we could rebuild the relationships that had been fractured. But even as Lindsay's words lingered in my mind, I knew the hardest part was still ahead confronting Eric. There was no denying it anymore. The gulf between us had only widened with time. And now, as much as it pained me, it was time to face it, head on. The chalets, the businesses, the sacrifices. None of them mattered if I couldn't break through the wall that had been built between me and my son. I had been avoiding the truth for years, thinking that success and material wealth would be the bridge between us. But the truth was, Eric didn't need more things from me. He needed me to be honest. He needed to see me for who I really was, not the man I had tried to be in his eyes, but the real me, flaws and all. As the night wore on and the soft glow of the chalet lights cast long shadows on the snow outside, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending confrontation. I knew Eric was still in the chalet. I could feel the tension in the air, the kind of tension that had settled over us for years. Unspoken, but ever present. I had tried for so long to appease him, to make him see that I was more than just my past, more than the facade of success. But it hadn't worked. He saw me through his own lens, through the eyes of a son who felt abandoned, misunderstood, and perhaps even resentful. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't put it off any longer. Eric needed to hear the truth. We both did. I found him in the living room, sitting by the fire, his arms crossed tightly as if guarding himself against the world. When he saw me, there was that familiar look, half dismissive, half wary. He hadn't expected me to approach him, let alone start a conversation. I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to begin. But then I just decided to speak from the heart. Eric, I began, my voice quieter than I intended. We need to talk. I know things between us haven't been easy. I've tried to fix everything with what I built, with the things I thought you needed. But the truth is, that's not what's been missing. What's been missing is us. Our connection. Eric didn't say anything at first, but I could see his body tense. He was waiting for me to go on, to say something that would either justify or excuse everything. But I wasn't here to justify myself anymore. I wasn't here to prove anything. I've spent my whole life building things. Businesses, properties, trying to prove I was enough. But in doing that, I've lost sight of what really matters. I've forgotten what it means to be a father, to be here for you, not just as someone who provides, but as someone who is present, who listens, who shares his real self. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in what felt like years. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or even curiosity. It was like I had finally broken through the shell he had built around himself, a shell I had unintentionally reinforced over the years. I don't want to be that man anymore. Eric, I continued, my voice steady. Now, I don't want to be the father who thinks that giving things is enough. I've given all I can, but it's never about the things. It's about the time we've lost, the words we haven't said, the connection we haven't made, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for not being there for you in the way I should have been. For the first time, Eric didn't respond with sarcasm or deflection. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of everything that had been said and unsaid over the years. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Eric sighed, his shoulders slumping. I never asked for any of this. Dad, he said, his voice soft. I never asked you to build all of this for me. I've just been, I don't know, trying to figure out who I am, what I'm supposed to do, and I guess I took it out on you." I nodded, my chest tightening as his words settled in. This wasn't just about the chalet. It was about the years of frustration, the feeling of being overlooked, and the deep-seated fears we both carried. Eric had never been able to articulate it before, but I saw now that he had been struggling with his own sense of identity, caught between his resentment of what I represented and his desire for connection. "I understand, son," I said quietly, "and I'm not perfect. I've made plenty of mistakes. But I'm here now, and I want to fix this. Fix us. Not with grand gestures. Not with things. But with time. With honesty. With respect." Eric looked at me, his gaze softer now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Maybe we couldn't fix everything in a single conversation. But this was a start. A real start. We had both been carrying this weight for far too long. But for the first time in years, I felt like there was room to breathe, room for healing, room for understanding. "I'll try." "Dad," he said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were testing the words before he fully believed them. "I know I've been hard on you. I don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to lose you." And in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was real. It was the beginning of something we both needed a chance to rebuild, not just the trust, but the love that had been lost over the years. I placed a hand on his shoulder, the weight of years of frustration lifting from my chest. "We're not there yet, Eric, but we're getting there, one step at a time." And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. We had started the long journey of rebuilding, and that was enough. After that conversation, a shift happened, subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in years, the air between Eric and me wasn't thick with hostility or resentment. There was something new in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before: vulnerability. It wasn't the arrogant defiance that usually clouded his expression. No, this time, he looked more like the son. I once knew a son who had been caught in the same struggle I had been, but too afraid to admit it. It felt like a small victory, but victories weren't what I needed right now. What I needed was something deeper, something real. We had years of distance to cover, years of miscommunications and unspoken resentments that couldn't be mended with just a conversation. Yet, that conversation was a start. And for once, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of change. It wasn't going to happen overnight, but I had to trust that it was possible. The road ahead was long, and I knew the battles were far from over. But that's what life was about, wasn't it? Fighting for what mattered. Even when the odds felt stacked against you, I walked back into the living room, my thoughts still swirling. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. Lindsay sat there, looking up at me as I entered. She didn't say anything right away, but I could see the question in her eyes, the hope. She had been quiet throughout my exchange with Eric, but now I could tell she was waiting for me to give her something, something that would reassure her, something that would tell her things were finally going to be okay. I sat down beside her, exhaling slowly. For the first time, the weight of my own emotions felt more manageable. It wasn't gone, not by any means, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. "You heard what we talked about?" I asked, my voice steady but quiet. Lindsay nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at me. "I heard, Dad. I saw it too. It's not going to be easy. But it's a start." You're finally getting through to him. I sighed, a mix of relief and frustration tugging at my chest. I don't know if I'm getting through to him, Lindsay, but I'm tired of trying to prove myself to him. I don't know if he'll ever truly understand. I don't know if he'll ever really see me for who I am. Lindsay placed her hand gently on mine, her touch warm and reassuring. You can't control how Eric sees you. You can only control what you do, how you show up. And you've done your part. Dad, you've been there for him, even when he didn't deserve it. That's all anyone can do. Her words, simple as they were, hit me harder than I expected. In all the years of trying to earn Eric's approval, I had forgotten the most important thing of all, that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I had worked so hard to build a life, a legacy, but somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of why I was doing it. I wasn't just building things to impress others. I was building them for me, for my family, for my future. And the moment I started to believe that, the weight on my shoulders lightened just a little. Thanks, Lindsay, I said, squeezing her hand. I know it's been hard on you, too. I'm sorry if I've made things difficult for you. For all of you, she smiled softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. You've never made things difficult for me. Dad, I just want you to be happy. I want us to be okay. And I think we can be, if we just keep trying. But you can't do it all on your own. You don't have to. The words hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. I had spent so long trying to do everything on my own, trying to fix everything for everyone. I thought if I could just make everything perfect, then maybe they would see me, understand me. But the truth was, I didn't have to fix it all. I didn't have to carry it all on my own. I had a family, and we could rebuild this together. I'll try, I said softly. A genuine promise I hadn't made to anyone in a long time. Not even to myself. I'll try to stop caring at all. To stop pretending everything is fine when it's not. But I need your help. Lindsay, all of you, she nodded, her smile warm. And for the first time, I felt like we were truly in this together. We weren't perfect. None of us were. But there was room for growth, for healing. We had to make that choice. Together. As the evening wore on, we shared a quiet dinner, the weight of the day's conversation hanging in the air. But not oppressively. It was as if we had finally allowed ourselves to be vulnerable with each other, to confront the unspoken truths that had been lingering for years. We didn't have all the answers, but we were starting to look for them, to take the first steps toward understanding, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet, imperfect evening, I realized something important. This wasn't about grand gestures, about proving anything to anyone. It was about taking the small moments, conversations, touch, time spent together, and using them to rebuild. To rebuild not just the chalet or the life I had worked so hard to create, but the relationships that truly mattered. Because, in the end, nothing else mattered if we didn't have each other. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I had spent too many years chasing something that wasn't real, seeking validation in the wrong places. Now, I knew that the only validation that truly mattered came from the people I loved most. It wasn't about showing them I was successful. It was about showing them I was here. I was present, and I was ready to rebuild. Together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future, about the journey ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it, and that was enough for me. The morning after our quiet, yet pivotal, conversation felt different. the weight of years of unresolved tension between Eric and me didn't magically disappear. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of something better ahead. As I sat at the breakfast table, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was almost peaceful. I could hear the soft hum of the coffee machine, the gentle clink of silverware against plates, and the quiet chatter between Lindsay and Sarah. There was a gentleness in the air, an unspoken understanding that we were trying to move forward. Step by step, Eric was quieter than usual, which wasn't surprising. His reactions had always been sharp, laced with sarcasm, but now he seemed almost withdrawn. I couldn't help but wonder if the conversation we had the night before had started to sink in, or if he was still processing it all. I had expected him to be more defensive, to lash out as he often did when faced with uncomfortable truths. But today, he seemed contemplative, as though he was finally taking a moment to reflect on everything that had happened, on his own actions, and the impact they had on me. Lindsay, too, seemed different. She hadn't said much, but there was a softness in her eyes, a gentleness in the way she moved around the kitchen. I could sense that she was relieved. She had always been caught in the middle, torn between her loyalty to Eric and her understanding of me. But now, it felt like she was beginning to see things in a new light, and I was grateful for that. As we ate, the conversation was light, almost normal. We spoke about the weather, about the plans for the day, about the chalet. But beneath the surface, I could feel the undercurrent of change, of unspoken words waiting to be said. The silence wasn't as heavy anymore. It was more like the calm before a storm, but not the kind that breaks everything apart. This was the kind of silence that hinted at healing, at the possibility of something better. After breakfast, I stepped outside onto the deck. The morning air was crisp, and the sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. It was beautiful, serene, almost surreal in its quiet perfection. The chalet, still standing proudly against the backdrop of nature, seemed to embody everything I had worked for. But now, standing there in the early morning light, I realized something. It wasn't just the chalet that had been built with effort. It was the relationships that needed to be nurtured, the trust that needed to be rebuilt. The moment I had feared for so long, the moment when I would confront Eric, when the cracks in our relationship would finally come to light, hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me. I had spent so much of my life seeking his approval, trying to prove that I was worthy of respect. But now, I knew that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The truth was that I had given everything I could. I had sacrificed. I had worked. And I had built something that, while impressive, didn't define who I was. It wasn't the chalet that made me worthy. It was my integrity, my effort, and my willingness to be vulnerable, to stand up and admit that I had made mistakes. I turned back toward the chalet, my thoughts still swirling, and found Eric standing in the doorway, watching me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, but the tension that used to fill the space between us seemed to have dissipated, replaced by something else, something lighter, more hopeful. "Morning," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. It's nice out here." I nodded, my eyes meeting his. "Yeah, it is. It's the kind of place that makes you stop and think. You know?" He stepped outside, joining me on the deck. There was still a distance between us, but it was different now, less of an abyss and more of a gap, a space that could be bridged with time and understanding. "I've been thinking, too." Eric said, his tone uncertain but earnest. About what you said last night. About what I've been doing. I turned to face him fully, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Eric, you don't have to. No. He cut me off, shaking his head. I do. I've been an idiot. I've treated you like crap. And I've been too stubborn to see what you've been doing for me. For us. I've always thought I knew better. That I was better than you. And that's not true. I can see that now. His words, though simple, carried weight. I didn't expect an apology. But here it was, raw and unfiltered. For years, I had been waiting for Eric to acknowledge his mistakes, to finally see me as more than just the father he resented. And now, in this moment, he was. I didn't need him to fix everything. But this was a start. It was the beginning of something I had hoped for, something I thought was lost. You don't have to apologize. Eric, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. You've been carrying your own weight. Too? I need you to understand that I've been doing this all for us. Not for the house. Not for the things. But for the family. I just want us to be real with each other. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine. I understand. And I want that too. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. I've been afraid to admit how much I've hurt you. How much I've resented you. But I don't want to feel that way anymore. I reached out, placing my hand on his shoulder. We're not going to fix everything in one day, Eric. But this is a start. I need you to meet me halfway. I can't keep trying to make things right on my own. He looked at me, his expression softening. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope. I'll try. Dad, I really will. The words didn't fix everything. They didn't erase the years of hurt or the misunderstandings. But for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was something worth fighting for. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the road ahead. Whatever came next, I knew we would face it together. I took a deep breath, looking out at the mountains, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. The future wasn't clear, but I was no longer afraid of it. The chalet wasn't just a house, it was the beginning of something new. Something we could build together. If only we were willing to try. The day after our conversation on the deck felt like a breath of fresh air, like a fog, had finally lifted from the space between Eric and me. We still had a long road ahead, but the tension that once hung in the air had dissipated, leaving room for something new. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could start repairing the damage that had been done over so many years. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect. Far from it. The air was still thick with the unspoken truths, and I could sense the unease lingering in the room whenever we all sat together. But something had shifted. There was a slight softness in Eric's tone now when he spoke to me. And Lindsay, too, seemed to have softened. She wasn't avoiding me anymore, and I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes. We were all trying. That was what mattered now. But there was still one more thing that needed to be addressed. A part of me knew that. No matter how much we tried to move forward, the hurt from the past couldn't be erased overnight. And Eric, as much as I wanted to believe that his transformation was genuine, was still holding on to the bitterness and the judgments that had defined our relationship for so long. The tension between us wasn't gone. It was just quieter, like a simmering pot, waiting to boil over again. And I knew, deep down, that in order for us to move forward, I had to do something that felt both terrifying and necessary, confront the deeper issues that had always existed between Eric and me. We couldn't keep avoiding the elephant in the room. The chalet, as beautiful as it was, wasn't the problem. It was the emotional distance we had created, the resentment that had built up over years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities to connect. It was time to face the truth, to address the issues that had been lingering far too long. That afternoon, after we'd all finished lunch, I took a deep breath and turned to Eric. The words had been swirling around in my head all morning, and I knew it was now or never. I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation we needed to have. Eric, I began, my voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. I think we need to talk about everything that's been happening between us. He looked at me, a flicker of tension appearing in his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might dismiss me again. But then, to my surprise, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "What do you want to talk about?" I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us. This wasn't just another conversation. This was the one that could either tear us apart again or begin to heal the rift that had been growing for years. "I think we both know that there's a lot we've been avoiding," I said, carefully choosing my words. "We've danced around it for so long, thinking that if we just ignored the issues, they would go away. But the truth is, Eric, they haven't gone away. They've been festering, and they're affecting everything. This chalet, all the things I've built, they're not the issue. The issue is the way we've treated each other, the way we've misunderstood each other. And I'm tired of pretending like it's all okay when it's not." Eric didn't interrupt. He didn't even look away. He just listened. His face, a mixture of frustration and something else, something deeper, like a hint of recognition. "I don't want to keep pretending either, Dad," he said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I've been angry for so long, angry at you, angry at myself. But I see it now. I see how much I've hurt you. I've been blind to everything you've done, to everything you've sacrificed for me and for the family. I didn't want to admit it, but I've been wrong." The words hung in the air, both a revelation and a relief. For the first time in a long while, Eric wasn't trying to deflect or make excuses. He was acknowledging the pain, his own and mine, in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure if this was the breakthrough we needed, but it was a start, a real start. "I'm not perfect either, Eric," I said, my voice steady, despite the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "I've made mistakes. I've spent so many years trying to make up for the time I lost, trying to prove I was enough. But in doing that, I've lost sight of what matters. It's not about what I can give you. It's about being present, being here for you, no matter what. And that's what I want. I want to be here. I want us to be here for each other." Eric's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability I had been waiting for. The walls were starting to come down, piece by piece. "I don't know if I can make up for everything I've said and done," he said quietly, his voice almost regretful, "but I'm willing to try. Dad, I really am." I nodded, feeling the weight in my chest begin to lift. That's all I've ever asked for. Eric, a willingness to try. We don't have to fix everything right now, but we can start. The conversation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But it was a breakthrough. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew there were still scars that needed time to heal. But in that moment, I finally understood what had been missing all along, the willingness to be honest, to face the uncomfortable truths that had been buried for too long. And I realized that this, more than anything, was the beginning of real change. As we sat there, both of us processing the conversation, the sound of the fire crackling in the background, I knew this was the first step toward rebuilding the relationship we had once had, one step at a time. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to take the journey. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the road ahead. It was time to rebuild not just the chalet, but the trust and love that had been lost, and that was enough. The days that followed the conversation with Eric felt strangely still. There was a new kind of quiet between us, one that wasn't filled with the tension of unspoken words, but instead, a tentative hope. For the first time in years, we were no longer at odds. The walls that had separated us felt less like an insurmountable barrier and more like cracks in a structure that was beginning to heal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't resolved. But it was progress. And for me, that was everything. Yet, there was still a lingering question in my mind. Could we keep this up? Could this fragile truce, this newfound understanding, survive the challenges that lay ahead? Eric's words had been sincere, but I knew the road to rebuilding trust was not a straight path. It was more like a winding mountain trail, full of obstacles, detours, and moments of doubt. I was willing to take that journey. But the question remained, was Eric, was I? I spent the following days reflecting on everything I had learned during our conversations, trying to understand not just what had gone wrong, but why it had happened in the first place. I had spent so many years trying to fix everything externally, through the things I could build and the success I could achieve. But in doing that, I had ignored the emotional work, the real work that needed to be done. I had neglected to nurture the very thing that I had spent so much time trying to preserve: my family. The chalet, as beautiful as it was just a house. The relationships we had, the respect and trust, those were the things that truly mattered. I had hoped that the chalet would be the catalyst for something deeper, something more meaningful. But I realize now that it wasn't the place that needed to change, it was us. We needed to face the truth of who we were, who we had become, and whether we were willing to make the effort to change. The chalet, in many ways, was just a reflection of our brokenness. It had become a symbol of what I had tried to create for us. But I had never truly taken the time to understand what we needed, what they needed. And so, I decided to take a step I had been avoiding. I needed to talk to Lindsay. She had been caught in the middle for so long, trying to balance her loyalty to Eric and her understanding of me. I could see how hard it had been for her, and yet, she had never once wavered in her support. It was time to address the elephant in the room, the tension that had lingered between us. One evening, after dinner, I found Lindsay sitting quietly by the fire, reading a book. I knew it was time. I walked over and sat beside her, not knowing exactly what I was going to say, but feeling the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. "Lindsay," I began, my voice soft but steady. "I think we need to talk." She looked up from her book, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "Of course. Dad, what's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to start. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," I said slowly. "About Eric, about the chalet, about us. I know it's been hard for you, trying to hold everything together. I just want you to know that I see how hard you've tried to keep things peaceful, even when I wasn't looking." Lindsay's eyes softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on mine. "I've tried, Dad," she said quietly, "but it's been hard. I've always wanted to make things work, to make you and Eric understand each other. But it's never been that simple. I think, maybe I've been avoiding the hard conversations. 2. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in. I think we've all been avoiding the truth. I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've spent so much time trying to fix everything from the outside, thinking that if I built something great, it would make everything else better. But it doesn't work that way. We've been ignoring the real work, the emotional work, the understanding, the respect we've been lacking. Lindsay was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she processed my words. I know, she said softly. I've seen it. I've seen how hard you've worked, how much you've sacrificed. But I think I've been afraid. 2. Afraid of confronting the things that hurt. Afraid of losing what we had. I squeezed her hand gently, grateful for her honesty. Lindsay, I don't want to lose what we have, but I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. We need to be honest with each other, with ourselves. We need to stop running from the tough stuff and start facing it together. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of hope. You're right, Dad, she said, her voice steady. We've all been avoiding it. But I think it's time for us to stop pretending. We need to be real with each other, even if it's hard. And in that moment, I felt something shift again, a sense of clarity, of peace, that I hadn't felt in years. We weren't there yet. We weren't perfect. But we were finally starting to break through the walls that had been keeping us apart. And that, for me, was enough. The road ahead would be long, and there would be challenges along the way. But as I looked at Lindsay, I knew that with her support, with Eric's willingness to try, and with my own determination to rebuild, we could find our way back to each other. One conversation, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the burden of rebuilding my family alone. The days that followed my conversation with Lindsay were unexpectedly calm, yet they carried a weight that I hadn't anticipated. There was a newfound sense of understanding in the house, a quiet acknowledgement that we were all, in our own way, trying to heal. Eric and I hadn't spoken much, but the air between us wasn't as tense. It felt like we had both been given a bit of space to process, and that was a good thing. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was comfortable, even hopeful. But despite the progress, I knew there was still one crucial conversation that needed to happen. It wasn't just about acknowledging the past. It was about looking toward the future. It was about truly deciding if we were ready to move forward, not as father and son, but as equals. And that, I realized, required me to let go of everything I had been holding on to. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of the past, the mistakes, the misunderstandings. It was time to forgive. And most importantly, it was time to forgive myself. That afternoon, as I sat by the fire with my coffee, I looked out the window, watching the sunlight play on the snow outside. It was so peaceful, so quiet. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened in the last few days. I had spent so many years trying to fix things externally, building businesses, accumulating wealth, creating the perfect home, all in an attempt to prove something. But now, I realized that none of that truly mattered. What mattered was the relationships I had built and the love I had given. What mattered was how we treated each other, how we understood each other, and whether we were willing to face the tough truths that lay beneath the surface. Eric walked in from the deck, a quiet figure in the doorway. He hesitated for a moment, as though unsure of how to approach me. But then, To my surprise, he walked over and sat down beside me. There was no sarcasm in his demeanor. No defensive walls, just silence. For a moment, we sat there together, simply existing in the same space. It was a small victory, but it was one I cherished. Finally, Eric spoke, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Dad, I've been thinking about everything. About you, about me. I don't know if I can ever truly make up for what I've done, but I want to try. I know I've hurt you, and I know I've been a pain in the ass, but I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not. I turned to look at him, his eyes sincere, his words filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. It was a rare moment, and one I had been waiting for, a moment where Eric finally saw the truth of his actions. A moment where we could start anew, not as father and son in the traditional sense, but as two people trying to understand each other, to respect each other. I know it's not going to happen overnight, I said, my voice steady, but I'm willing to try too. Eric, I've spent too long waiting for you to understand. But maybe the problem is that I've been trying to force it, trying to make you see things my way. It's not about that. It's about letting go of the past and accepting who we are, who we've become, and most of all, it's about forgiveness. Eric nodded slowly, his eyes focused on the fire. I don't know if I can forgive myself for what I've said and done, he murmured, almost to himself, but I'm willing to try. Dad, I think I owe you that much. I placed my hand on his shoulder, the weight of years of frustration and anger slowly lifting. You don't owe me anything, Eric, but I do need you to understand that forgiveness isn't just for the other person, it's for yourself. Too, I've spent so long holding on to my own anger, my own guilt, that I never stopped to think about what it was doing to me. I don't want to live like that anymore, and I don't want you to either. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after understanding, after shared honesty. The weight of the past hadn't been erased, but we had started the work of moving forward. I'm sorry, Dad, Eric said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I really am. I know, I said softly, squeezing his shoulder. And I'm sorry too, for all the times I tried to force you to see things my way, for all the moments I thought that if I gave you more, you'd finally understand. It's not about that, Eric. It's about being here for each other, in ways that matter. We sat in silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly in the background. It wasn't perfect. We weren't perfect. But for the first time, I felt like we were on the right path. It was a path of forgiveness, of understanding, of rebuilding trust. And as I sat there, next to my son, I realized that it wasn't about the chalet, or the businesses, or the grand gestures. It was about the quiet moments, the ones where we truly saw each other, where we were willing to be vulnerable, to forgive, and to move forward together. The lesson I learned wasn't just about rebuilding what had been broken. It was about letting go of the expectations, the anger, and the need to prove myself. The truth was, I had already built something incredible. But it wasn't the chalet, or the wealth, or the success. It was the relationships I had, the love that was there, even if it had been buried beneath years of misunderstanding. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to let go of the past, to forgive, to heal, and to move forward. But it is also the most freeing. I had spent my life chasing success, but I realized that true peace comes not from achievements, but from understanding and forgiveness, and that's what I was finally ready to embrace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and setbacks. But for the first time, I was ready to face it all, not alone, but with my family. We had taken the first step, and that was enough. In the end, the true lesson was this: forgiveness is the bridge that connects us all. And it's not just about forgiving others, it's about forgiving ourselves, too. Only then can we move forward, unburdened and ready to build something real. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.